seats. And please don't feel shy and come to the front. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion on preserving fiscal space in times of shock, boosting international efforts for scaling up debt post clauses. My name is, can you hear me?
No.
Fantastic. Huh? It's a good start. Voilà, it's just too far, sorry. So welcome to this session. My name is Piera Tortora. I'm the head of the 4P Secretariat, the Paris Pact for People and the Planet, which was launched in June 2023 by President Macron and many other world leaders in a summit on a new financing pact with the aim to accelerate the reform of the international financial architecture. And today, the 4P counts 70 countries from across all continents and all income levels. And these countries work together through the 4P and have formed operational coalitions on various pillars of the international financial architecture reform, including on private finance mobilization, on global solidarity levies, and we had a meeting on this earlier today, and others. So I'm very delighted to be the moderator for this session, and I'm very delighted to be joined by many members of the 4P, like Barbados, France, Spain, and UK, Senegal, and by many partners of the 4P. So we're gathering today at a time when the debt challenges facing many developing countries are reaching new heights. The latest figures we have point that interest payments exceed 10% of government revenue in 56 developing countries, nearly double the number from a decade ago. And in 2023, developing economies' total external debt servicing reached a record of $1.4 trillion US. So this is when we're looking at the needs or the challenges. Now, when we look at how we can respond to these needs, we also know that we're gathering at a time when aid budgets are increasingly under pressure. Many countries from across the board are cutting their aid budgets, and the concept of aid itself is being questioned. So this is why I believe conversations like the one we're having today on scaling up innovative financing mechanisms and instruments such as the debt pause clauses, then on one hand can make a real difference for countries, especially vulnerable countries, in the event of shocks by helping to preserve fiscal space so that they can respond to the shock without jeopardizing future growth, and that at the same time virtually bear no additional costs to the international community is, absolutely critical. So it's absolutely critical to have conversations like the one we're having today on how to scale up these instruments. And I think some of the discussions that will happen in the coming days and weeks perhaps will be difficult because of the issues that I illustrated before, but this conversation today on debt pause clauses should really not So how can we get there? How do we best scale up debt pause clauses in terms of both working better together across stakeholders and how to provide debt pause clauses in a way that best services developing countries. So for those of you who are not familiar with debt pause clauses, these are clauses that allow countries to temporarily suspend debt payments in times of shocks, and therefore can be a critical tool for preserving fiscal space and ensuring that countries have breathing room when they try to, so that they can respond to the shock and rebuild. And for countries that already have debt vulnerabilities, maintaining fiscal space in the event of major shocks is not just a matter of economic management. It is a question of protecting future growth and the well-being of citizens, ensuring governments can respond effectively to shocks, safeguarding progress towards the SDGs. And multilateral development banks have really been at the forefront of adopting these clauses, in particular with the pioneering experiments of the IDB. So we're very happy that you're with us today. And since then, many others have announced them. And among bilateral lenders, CRDCs are offered by France, UK, Canada announced them. But this is still not a mainstreamed instrument and is still very niche. At the political level, climate resilience debt clauses, which are a particular type of debt pause clauses triggered by climate events, are one of the major calls from the Bridgetown Initiative, and I'm delighted that the Bridgetown is represented today. And at the summit for a new global financial pact, from which the 4P was born, France and UK launched a new call to action on CRDCs, building on the UK-led private sector working group. And in 2025, the 4P will focus on reviving this call to action. So really the purpose of this meeting today is to take stock of the progress so far in the implementation of debt pause clauses, what are some of the key challenges and gaps that remain, and how can we best work together, knowing all the initiatives that are taking place, knowing the efforts of different partners to revive together these efforts, including through a call to action 2.0, to really make a step forward in Seville and then at the COP. So I'm joined today by an impressive set of panelists. I'm really honored to be sharing the panel with you. So with no further ado, I will turn to the panelists. And I know that we're several, and we didn't have so much time, so I would be grateful if each of the speakers can try to keep their interventions to 5 minutes. So I would like to start from the Minister of Economy and Finance of France, Éric Lombard. And I really would like to ask him to frame a little bit this discussion and tell us why focusing on scaling up debt pause clauses, scaling up CRDCs is so critical as part of the international response to reduce debt and climate vulnerabilities, and how can the 4P coalition or this action, call to action, bring most value and synergies with some of the other existing initiatives, for instance, the work at the G20. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piera, and good afternoon to all of you. Maybe let me start by reminding or summarizing in front of you what this G20 stands for and what it is all about, because I think it's an important time in our common history. This G20, as the previous ones, is about cooperation, is about multilateralism. And we have defended here during those 2 days how important that was in order to plan for a sustainable and equitable future for mankind. And most countries around the table have stated that cooperation was a much better way to move ahead than unilateralism and action of one country against the others. And I'm not naming any specific country because that can apply, unfortunately, to many countries those days. In that regard, the 4P initiatives, the Paris Partenariat for the Planet, is important, and this call for action launched in June 2023 by France, the UK, Barbados, Ghana, the US, Canada, and Spain, called the creditors to systematically offer, as Pierre reminded, a climate-resilient debt clause. What does that mean? We are in a situation where for low-income countries and medium-income countries, debt vulnerabilities remain high, although the IMF don't see a situation of systemic debt crisis. We have mentioned a few countries that are already under debt pressure that can be difficult to manage for their people. And in order to help those countries to cope with debt issues, climate-resilient debt clauses allow them, in case of a climate event, to manage this debt along, of course, the clauses that allow them either to pass interest or more. And we believe that is important because, of course, that made debt borrowing much more sustainable. It provides contractual clauses in case of natural disasters that provide vital breathing space and liquidity. That is, I used to be also an insurer before to be a minister, and that is what is called a catastrophic bond in the terms of insurance business, and it is the implementation of that kind of clause in the world of public financing of government. And those clauses are now put together in the loans of the French Treasury for developing countries. We were one of the first sovereign creditors to include that systematically since December 2022, and other multilateral development banks are also following. If we do that at scale, of course, that will have a strong impact. And under Brazil's presidency, the G20 published a landmark presidency paper on those clauses that set out the advantages and also the limitation, including the fact that it cannot solve all debt issue sustainability problems. Regarding the way forward, according to where we are today, 4P Coalition could support different ongoing international initiatives in order to avoid duplication. The G20 continue to work and is planning a mapping exercise on CRDC recently put in place in order to better understand how to standardize clauses to meet the needs of creditor and debtor alike. The 4P supported independent panel of world-leading experts is analyzing the link between debt, climate, and biodiversity. This is sponsored by Colombia, Germany, Kenya, and France, as CRDC will be part of this analysis. This report will be published during the next IMF World Bank meeting that will take place in Washington next spring. I also want to draw your attention to the next UN Sevilla Financing for Development Conference, where many of us will be, that will also discuss debt issues and CRDC, and will be another opportunity to incentivize all creditors. And then, as a conclusion, to try to stick to the 5-minute limit that have been given to me, 1 minute left. That's too much. I'd like to praise Canada, notably in the context of the G7 presidency. We had a meeting this morning, and UK for the active promotion of CRDC throughout the world. So it's another very active feature of what 4P is promoting that I want to greet, and which shows that there are many tools that can be put together to be more efficient in the time of climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you so much, Minister, and also for recalling the 4P expert review on debt, climate, and nature, which indeed will provide a more thorough analysis of debt issues and some of the tools. So let me now turn to the Minister Carlos Cuerpo, the Minister of Economy, Trade, and Business of Spain. I think it's great news that Spain is really has really identified debt pause clauses as something that could be a key deliverable for Sevilla, so for the financing for sustainable financing conference. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is the ambition from Spain in terms of debt pause clauses for Sevilla, and how can we collectively as that ambition? Thank you.
For sure, thank you very much. Thanks also for the invitation to have a very interesting conversation on a key topic which is very dear to our heart in Spain and which will be a central part of the conference in Sevilla, as you well said. Let me put a bit of context into the discussion and particularly into the conference on financing for development in Sevilla that you know, I hope all of you know by now, that will take place end of June, beginning of July. So brace for a very high temperature in Sevilla as well. So there is a clear message from our side to really have the conference as a key landmark, particularly in a very complex year for the multilateral world. And for this to happen, we are basically betting on a bold, and bold is a key word here, bold and concrete set of deliveries. And I think this is potentially the main message that I want you to live with today. And let me just explain quickly why I think this will prove to be a blueprint for financing for development going forward. So when I say bold, I would like to go back to the figures that you said at the very beginning, Piera, on the need of the developing world in terms of the toll that interest rates expenditures provide. But with a different data element. So we have 3.3 billion people today living in countries that have to spend more on interest rate expenditures than on education or health. So it's a rapid way to look at the trade-offs that these actually imply for the present, but also for the future growth of those countries. So there, the need to be bold and to be bold now. How can we be bold? Well, first by having everyone, every important stakeholder around the table and present in Sevilla. Of course, multilateral institutions, MDBs will be there. The private sector needs to be there as well. We need to really work together hand in hand to provide for the necessary financing and to really unlock all the necessary inflows of money to the developing world, so that at least we don't have negative net flows of financing to development in the low-income countries and also in middle-income countries. Bold also in terms of providing for innovative solutions. We need to keep on thinking out of the box. So the challenge is still there, despite all the efforts that we've been putting together for the past decades. So we need to keep on thinking outside of the box for the next few months to be able, again, to respond to the extent that we can in Sevilla. And we need to maintain the degree of ambition. And let me just give you another figure here. If you look at how many SDRs we have been able to rechannel from the advanced countries, there is still a lot of work to do there in order to be more ambitious. If all of us, actually, just to give you a reference, went up to 60% rechanneling of our current SDRs, of the latest allocation, we would have actually, we could free up to 90 billion, 90 extra billion, 93 actually, if we're more concrete. So that's a huge fiscal space which is there for developing countries to take and therefore to avoid this trade-off that I just mentioned. But then, I said, let's be bold, but let's be concrete. And on being concrete, we have a specific delivery here on which we've been working on many countries. You said 73 have been actually walking the talk and have been really putting in place this innovative measure, which is, again, another quick way, rapid way to respond to climate crisis. when we think of the impact and the frequency of climate crisis, which both of them are increasing due to, of course, the effects of climate change. Just to give you an idea, you might know that in Spain in October, last 29th of October, we suffered from floodings in the region of Mediterranean, region of Valencia, basically was ground zero. And what we get from experts is that actually those are now twice as likely and also 12% times as severe as they would have been without the impact of climate change. So especially because the temperature of the Mediterranean is rising very rapidly. Again, therefore, we need to keep on providing those specific tools for countries that suffer from these specific contingencies. From the Spanish perspective, we're also walking the talk. We're including those clauses in loans, restructuring agreements, not only with low-income countries, also with medium-income countries, and extending the triggers, including climate, but also health emergencies and food crisis, to be able to really get to the extent possible to the maximum potential use of those instruments. So for Sevilla, again, what we expect is ambitious language in the communiqué, of course, in the outcome document, but practical implementation elements, like, of course, broad take-up, so increasing this coalition of the willing on the use of this instrument. Also, we expect to rally support for scaling up this instrument and to be able to standardize further these clauses so that in the end it's easier, so the incentives to take them up are increased. We will have a specific event early June on the road to Sevilla, a roundtable in Madrid, to take stock of the practices, to get to align perspective, and also to look at the next steps. And just in conclusion, being bold, being concrete, but also, and I will follow Eric on this, we need to really make the best of the power of acting together. I think it's a moment to really rally behind the multilateral efforts because they actually pay off. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister, for the leadership of Spain in this process and also for this call to act together. I think in this moment in time is really important. And I just would like also to acknowledge the presence of the Minister Delegate from France. So thank you so much for joining us, Minister. Let me, and let us know if you'd like to come in the discussion, of course. But let me now turn to the next panelist. Who is Ilan Golfan, so the president of the Inter-American Development Bank. So we have said before, the IDB has actually been one of the first multilateral institutions to include CRDC's climate resilient debt clauses in their loans. So I think it would be really interesting to know what are the next steps that IDB is envisaging to scale up its own offering of CRDCs, but also how can we work together, including through the 4P, to learn from what you have been doing and really ensure that we can build on that. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Pierre, for that. It's a pleasure to be here in this company of the ministers and everybody here at this table. It's an honor. It already shows the cooperation between us. What I want to talk about is, first, how multilateral development bank can apply this type of clauses, what we have been doing since Paris in 2023, and what are we going to do in the next steps. And finally, how we can cooperate together. So let me tell you a little bit about how it has evolved. First, these clauses are becoming mainstream in every contract we have. We are now 3 times more in terms of volume than we had just a year ago. And they have been used by countries. So just in a few months, we had Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Panama. You see different sizes and different type of incomes of countries that are actually getting into these clauses. Those clauses, in our case, postpone the payments for 2 years. And that's one of the most important things because it doesn't make the countries have to choose between paying and using the resources and actually thinking about how to service their debt or social. Where are we going now? First, we are hearing the countries, and they say that the clauses are not perfect, They don't get into all the perils. So we are expanding that. So flooding, for example, that Minister Carlos mentioned in the case of Spain, we are including that. Number two, we are thinking about combining it with other instruments to have it complete. For example, we are thinking that combining CDRCs with catastrophe swaps or catastrophe insurance policies. It's a menu of risks. Why a menu? Because while the CDRCs postpone payments, there's still payments for the future. While the insurance, if we are able to do it in a good way, it will actually transfer the risks to the insurance company, to others. The problem, of course, is the cost. And this is what we are working about. Cat bonds tend to be quite expensive to the smaller countries. Those swaps and those things through the multilateral development banks can be maybe a little bit less expensive. And that's the next frontier that we want to complement with that. In addition, cooperation not only across this table, but across the region. In our next annual meeting, which is going to be just in a few weeks, we're going to launch a regional program where the countries work together for the resilience, not only to prepare, but to act together when there is a disaster in one of the countries. So that's coordination. And we're going to launch it in Santiago, Chile, with the other countries. Also, it is important for us to work our own work. So we are elevating the disaster risks. It was a unit. We are actually creating an organization to just focus on that, because that's actually something quite important to us. So your question is, how can 4P help us? First, it's already helping because you see, we are going to Sevilla, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it together. We started a lot in Paris, but we need more. We need the awareness. We need the resources together. And thank you, Minister Carlos, about talking about rechanneling SDRs. We are very happy if we can get rechanneling of some of the SDRs. But also other donor resources that we can combine so that we make all these instruments less expensive. And that's very important for us. So we need to scale up the CDRCs. We need the financial DRM toolkit in general. We need to spread the word. We need to help us find new partners. We need to mobilize private sector in order to help us have a toolkit that provides the countries the necessary resilience to more frequent and severe natural disasters. This is the way to allow countries to address natural disasters and simultaneously protect the population from the social consequences. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I think, why can't everybody just build on this example and mainstream these clauses like you are doing? And I think also you raised a very important point on the cost. And we know in discussions with your staff that is also linked to the treatment of the credit rating agencies of the clauses. So I'm really happy that we're also bringing the credit rating agencies around the table so that we can actually find solutions. And they're already working out some solutions on this. So that's fantastic. So let me turn now to our next speaker, who's Rachel Kite, who's the climate envoy of the UK. And we have already talked a little bit about the leading role that the UK has played in the on this agenda through the UK-led working group on the private sector working group. So Rachel, I would like to ask you, we have heard some very positive examples just now, but there are also gaps and challenges that remain. So can we get a little bit into that? And can we also get a little bit into how, what is the specific niche perhaps of the 4P to help fill some of those gaps? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Piera, for the invitation. And it's great to be sitting on this panel with so many comrades in in this effort. And I salute the leadership. I agree completely with my Spanish colleague in terms of our ambition and the way in which we partner together to get this done. So I think from a UK point of view, this is something that is eminently scalable. And it's a real test of partnership because there are many different facets to it, but then as we work out what works and what suits the borrowers as well as the creditors, then I think we can get to a point where we can push this forward even faster. So we've been, as the UK, offering these clauses through our export credit agency, through UKEF. But I think that, and we've also offered these within our lending agreements to about 8 countries. But as we go forward, I think we're really focused on what is the most useful for the borrowers, right? This is a dance. And it's clear that these are most useful to the borrowers if we have as many creditors as possible involved working together. So obviously we've got bilateral creditors and the MDBs all launching disaster clause pilots and committed to doing so. So that's the most important sort of first step. We've got more and more loan agreements now being amended to involve these clauses. That's good. We've seen activation of these clauses, for example, in Grenada last year. Grenada, sorry, I got going from Spain to the Caribbean there. And so this is, this immediately opens up the fiscal headspace for a country to respond to, in this case, the devastating effect of Hurricane Beryl. But there's more work to be done. So to answer your question, Piera, here are 3 things where we think we need to focus in the period ahead. First of all, how can we improve the offer, the existing offer, as I've said, to make it easier for borrowers to take up? There are some barriers or some little kinks that we can iron out. So fees can act as a deterrent. So at the annual meetings of the bank and the fund last year, we announced that we would support countries to take up disaster clauses in their World Bank loans by covering the fees. So let's see how that works. And I think it's sort of a consistency of approach across all the partners which allows you to scale. But in the long run, these are going to have to be offered at no cost. And that improves sustainability, offers benefits on both sides. So we want to offer clauses to cover more disasters, including like health shocks, climate or environmental shocks. So it's really important to hear from borrowers about what they need for this to be structured in the best way. So the end goal is always going to be to transform this from something that's unique and innovative to something that is a standardized tool. And I think that's why the dialogue between borrowers and creditors is so important. And I think 4P can be very important in moving to standardization. The second thing is that we really, we need to push the frontier and try to bring the private sector creditors on board to offer these clauses. Yeah, it's challenging, but look at us. There's nothing that we can't do together. So we addressed, in a recent speech at the London Stock Exchange, our Minister of Development called upon actors and creditors within the City of London to take an opportunity to think carefully together with government about how we might be able to do this. And then the third and final point, I think, is, so first of all, improve the existing offer. Second, let's see if we can get private creditors on board with this. Third was to really understand that this is just one small component of an overarching disaster risk architecture. And that desperately needs scaling up, as I think both Ilan and Carlos have already talked about. And there, I think, the high-level panel on closing the protection gap, which in its recent report talked about a 10-fold scaling up in pre-arranged finance, is sort of a North Star for us as we go forward. So very proud to be part of this burgeoning alliance, see an important role for 4P, and those are just 3 things that we think we should be focused on in the next 12 months. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think indeed that those were very concrete points. And thank you so much for highlighting also what is the role that the 4P can play there. And because you mentioned also that we need to focus on what is the most beneficial for the borrowers, I think that's a fantastic subsequence to our next speaker, who is Amadou Hott, who is a former Minister of the Economy of Senegal. So I would really welcome your thoughts and in terms of what is it that needs to be done from the perspective of the borrowers? What are some critical elements to take into account as we think about scaling up debt pause clauses? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Piera, for the opportunity. It's a great honor to be here with all the panelists and in front of all of you. This is a very important topic, and we all seen during the COVID time how it was very impactful for certain countries during that time with the DSSI. And I think using this COVID to try now to have other disasters and crises to be also integrated and standardize this mechanism, I think is extremely useful. From the borrower's perspective, I think one key element would be cost, especially if we are convincing, let's say, the private creditors, if there is a way to convince them also to join the initiative, there will definitely be a cost impact. Who's going to bear that cost? And also how the rating agencies will view that kind of mechanism. And I think we'll hear from the managing director from S&P, Samira, to see what would be the impact. What we wouldn't want is increased risk premium basically for our countries, but also downgrades because of that type of mechanism. Hopefully those consequences will be limited. What's also important for us would be to continue investing in resilient infrastructure, because ultimately what we want is our economies to be resilient to climate shocks, for example. We want also, when there is a health crisis, that the economies are prepared, the health system also is prepared to deal with those issues even before we get some benefits from this type of important clauses. And to do that, we would need to work more with the MDBs to make sure that they have enough resources. And I think the idea of channeling SDRs to MDBs that will use them as a hybrid capital and strengthen their balance sheet, take a little bit more risk, and lend more at almost concessional terms instead of countries going to sometime expensive capital market, I think would be actually a good way to tackle also this issue. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amadou. And if I can now turn to Pepoukaye Bardouille. So we know that Barbados has been a beneficiary of CRDCs, but it's also been an incredible leader on the political international scene to advocate for the scale-up of CRDCs. So I really look forward to hearing some of your views. So thank you so much for participating. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pierre. It's an honor to be here. It's a very distinguished panel. If I could take the liberty of expanding a little bit on the scope, and I'll keep it short. So for sure, climate resilient debt clauses, or let's call them natural disaster clauses, are critical. I come from a small island that was devastated by a hurricane, Dominica. 226% of GDP was lost overnight. So in this case, I guess we didn't need that debt clause at the time. We didn't leverage it. We didn't have it. But this is a question of breathing or not breathing after a disaster. So this is real world, and it is critical. However, and I think this has been spoken to by many of the previous speakers, certainly by President Golfan when you spoke about expanding the toolkit, by Minister Lombard and Minister Cuerpo. But Minister Hott, you just said something key, which is that we need to invest in resilience. So there are ways to get that money to the table. Some will take more time, some will take less. But one of the areas that I don't think is being looked at enough is debt conversions. So to give you a concrete example, and here again, compliments to the IDB and EIB, if EIB is in the room. Barbados recently completed a debt conversion, required $300 million in guarantees from the EIB and IDB, which unlocked low-cost local currency financing from banks in Barbados. So that's domestic resource mobilization. And in total, unlocked or saved $125 million, a single debt conversion, $125 million. So we need debt pause clauses. We need those pause clauses to not just be for small states exemption countries, to not just be for climate disasters, to cover food, pandemics, everything that we've discussed, not just be for public, but also private. But in addition, we need resources. We need investment. And if we do not repurpose and convert expensive debt, then that's a missed opportunity. It's like cash, money left on the table. What does it require? It requires guarantees. How do we get those guarantees? We need to also standardize that. And then one last point that I'll put in is post-disaster. So Hurricane Beryl has come up. In the case of Hurricane Beryl, and again, IDB, thank you. You have, like debt pause clauses, been ahead of the game in terms of post-disaster contingent liability. The World Bank also has a similar instrument called the CAT DDOs. However, recently, so last July, 4 countries were deeply affected by Hurricane Beryl: Jamaica, Barbados, St. Vincent, and Grenada. And out of all of those 4 countries, only 1 had a CAT DDO in place, which was Grenada. So not only did they trigger a pause clause, but they triggered liquidity post-disaster, because no finance minister would want to run around the world looking for immediate financing in the aftermath of a disaster. So while we're standardizing other things like pause clauses and conversions, we must also standardize, just like that line of credit you have in your bank account and you only know you have it when you bounce a check. I think we need to standardize universal post-disaster liquidity facilities on concessional terms, particularly on concessional terms for those countries that have shown commitment to investment in resilience, have done their country platforms, and have done their resilience planning. There must be a reward on the back end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pep, for really bringing this to life and really offering a very concrete experience from the region. So let me now turn to Samira Mensah, who is the Managing Director of Standard & Poor's. How credit rating agencies rate debt instruments that contain CRDCs can actually profound affect how interesting these loans are from a borrower perspective, and we've heard that because there might be an impact on the cost. Standard & Poor's has taken a proactive stance on this, and so we really look forward to hearing from you in terms of what is the work that you are conducting in this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Piera, and thank you for having S&P Global Ratings on this occasion. I certainly share, and we share at S&P Global Ratings, the thought process and thinking that we've heard here around the table. We review regularly our rating definitions and methodology criteria, which speaks to the capacity and the willingness to repay debt in full and in time. And so what we did back in December 2024 is amend our rating definition to certainly include the CRDC aspect, which speaks essentially to that debt deferral without triggering a default. And so the way we look at it from a credit rating standpoint is certainly to look at, number one, conditions that need to be met are, number one, the fact that a climate crisis or a natural disaster has taken place that is defined actually in the terms and conditions of the loan or the bond. That number two, an independent authority confirms that the trigger event meets that significance in terms of being meaningful to be qualified as a natural catastrophe in insurance terms of natural disasters. The third one, of course, is that the interest payments continue to accrue so that the net value of the transactions is not affected. And certainly, and that's the fourth point, the last condition, has to do with the fact that when the sovereign, let's say, suspend and defer the payment on any given clause, is that it doesn't take that opportunity to pay another financial obligation. So it's really important that the CRDCs or the debt pause clauses are not used actually to sort of arbitrage between one obligation against another. And this ultimately actually carries and contributes to financial flexibility, to boost climate resilience, certainly for sovereigns of low-income, middle-income countries, and also strengthen the debt restructuring architecture, generally speaking. And we have seen, of course, at the back of the pandemic, the DSSI and the restructuring framework taking a little bit of time actually to shape up. And these debt clauses, generally speaking, will simply speed up, especially actually if standardization is established, speed up not only, of course, adoption by MLI, which has been demonstrated, but certainly the take-up from commercial banks. I think there is a clear interest from commercial banks to also adopt these clauses. But more importantly, I think that standardization speaks about debt holders. And so if that happens, I think there will be a win there because, of course, bondholders are a sort of a different category of creditors. So the way that, just to finish up here, the way that we will work and that we work actually on the CRDCs at the moment, or debt clauses going forward, if they affect, health crisis or health shocks, is to essentially say we will not actually trigger a default on an instrument or selective default on the issuer if indeed that debt is repaid within 2 years or at the earliest of, the 2 years or the maturity of the debt instruments. Knowing, of course, that the underlying assumptions is that it is not used, the triggering of that clause is not used to pay another debt. So that is really quite key. And so, yes, we haven't seen actually much countries trigger these debt clauses. Barbados, of course, is one of them, and we rate it. Grenada is another one, and my co-panelist mentioned that as well. And so, essentially, I think we look at this as a certainly innovative way of building on that aspect of climate resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samira. And I think I'm really delighted that you could join us and that also you're joining the conversation of the coalition, because I think what the credit rating agencies do have such an impact on development and financing that we really need to engage much more with you for any discussions on development and climate. So thank you so much. Let me now turn to our next speaker, who is Pierre Cailleteau, the Managing Director of the Certain Advisory Practice at Lazare. And Lazare has recently conducted a study together with the Caribbean Development Bank about how to structure CRDCs in the Caribbean. So we really look forward to hearing perhaps 1 or 2 key lessons from that experiences. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Pierre, for the invitation. Very happy to speak about this very important subject. So what I'm going to do is to start with a practical example, and I will then draw 3 broader operational conclusions. Indeed, we work for the Caribbean Development Bank after having won the MDB challenge. So what was the problem to solve? The problem was to find a way to protect the borrowing countries, that is the Caribbean countries that are borrowing to the Caribbean Development Bank, and that are vulnerable to climate shocks, to be sure, via debt service suspension clauses, but in a way that does not endanger the credit rating. So the whole issue was to try to put in place those clauses in a rating neutral way. Now, what was the conclusion, the solution that we found? Indeed, we proposed to offer climate-related debt service suspension clauses for free, one, so there's no payment. Second, on the stock of the assets, the loans, not on the flows. So it's much more ambitious in a way, on the stock, and indeed for 2 years. Of course, if you do that, if you put in place those debt service suspension clauses on your whole balance sheet, on the asset side, well then that means that actually if there is a shock, your revenues are going to go down. Even perhaps massively, there is a correlation. So therefore, and that has an impact possibly on the liquid assets of the MDB and therefore potentially on the credit rating. So what we thought about was to mimic on the liability side the same structure and raise junior debt that had the same trigger in terms of than the clauses, contingent clause on the asset side. So a hurricane level 2 or 3, etc., would then, of course, trigger on the liability side the suspension of the coupons for this hybrid debt. So the whole idea was to have a balance sheet that is symmetrical on the asset side and on the liability side that is, in fact, sensitive to shocks. Just to give you an idea, well, this is a 1.5 billion assets, development assets in the book of the Caribbean Development Bank, and 0.9 billion equity. So all the calculations we made a number of simulations, and in order to make sure that we are, at 95% certainty to have enough capital, etc., looking at for a given level of intensity of a shock and with a given level of correlation, well, we came up with a 350 hybrid capital with a 40% equity content, because we didn't want to change the capital ratio. I realize this is a bit complex, what I'm saying, but the whole thing is to say that we're able, through a sort of symmetrical balance sheet solution, to find a solution. Now, what are the 3 broad conclusions we drew from that? One, lending in ways that are better adapted to the debt service capacity of the borrower, should really be uncontroversial. The idea of tailoring the debt service profile to the debt service capacity of the country is really what the international community has been trying to do. The thing is that goes beyond climate and ideally to all loans. So for instance, what we should think about is an idea where any exogenous shock that abruptly wipes out 10% of the revenues or more, or increases by 10% more the primary expenditure, that should trigger, for instance, that should be a candidate to trigger such debt suspension clauses. Now, and ideally, such clause should be put in all MDB laws, but I think not only on the flows, but on the stock. I know that I'm not paying for that, but still, I really believe that the calculation we made, this is not a massive financial issue. Second point, clearly, and it's been said, if you do that for the MDBs, well, that's only part of the liability structure of the countries. They have other type of debt. But then, this is not very complicated to imagine that there could be an insurance from MDBs, perhaps, to those countries on the commercial loans of the same nature. Why do I say that? Of course, this would be expensive, but if you ask the countries to pay that for them, yeah. But look at, I'm spending a lot of my time advising governments in the restructuring of their debt. I can tell you this is expensive for the governments. So if you can avoid having debt restructuring and having those clauses where you pay, there is an insurance to be paid indeed, to be socialized in the international community, but in the end, this can be very meaningful. And the third and last point, in my view, that if you do that, then on the very complex issue of the preferred credit status of MDBs, we may have an idea, because this preferred credit status is a very complex matter that is really under stress, and has been, and who has a preferred creditor and who has not, is unclear who decides and why. If you were to, I would argue that those institutions that do offer those clauses to their borrowers, they should benefit from the preferred credit status. Why? Because they are really helping the governments face shocks, etc. And so therefore, they should really be sanctuarized if there is a debt restructuring. So I finish there.
Thank you so much, Pierre. And I think you also showed how, we should be working towards a universal principle of debt pause clauses, but then we may need to find very different solutions, not just dependent on the beneficiary country, but also on the institution that provides those clauses. So now let me end with, as we would say in Latin, dulcis in fundo, so the sweetest for the last. So we're ending with our host, the person who has brought us all together here. So I'm really delighted to welcome Rémi Rioux, the CEO of the French Development Agency and co-chair also of the FIX Summit. So the CRDCs are actually one of the 4 priorities of the Financial Innovation Lab that has been launched at FIX. So Rémi, I would really welcome some views from you in terms of what do you think are the synergies that we can establish between this work and the work of the 4P in this area. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pierre. Good afternoon, everybody. No, I really want to thank the 4P and you to put this issue that is we heard it both highly political and also very technical. So within the finance in common discussion, I think that's extremely interesting. For several reasons. The first one is Rachel, others. We are sticking here to the climate agenda. I heard my minister also on stage yesterday saying this is happening. We have to stay calm and resolute and continue to fight against climate change. And I think that's also the spirit in these rooms for 3 days. The second is we know here that we will only succeed if we push further financial innovation. So that's my neighbor's signature. Now, thank you, Ilian, for having supported the creation in Cartagena of a FIX innovation lab. I mean, for resilience, let's call it resilience or adaptation of disaster risk reduction or loss and damage, whatever the name, we know that there are an array of instruments that is useful and that we have to explore. Debt swaps were mentioned. Contingency loans simply are also of interest. Of course, all the insurance mechanisms that are happening are very important. Strong supporters on this side of the table of rechanneling SDR through multilateral development banks to reach national development banks, as you know it. Well, many things are happening. And as part of the working groups and work of this FIX Innovation Lab, yes, we have identified CRDCs as one of the issue. And on this, of course, the more systemic we are, the more powerful and impactful we will be. AFD in the past, in the year 1990, 2000, we tried this. I remember, especially in Sahel countries facing macroeconomic shocks linked to the price of cotton, we had developed counter-cyclical loans, which was exactly the kind of scheme we are discussing yet, but we stayed by ourselves. So we stopped, and our clients were not interested because the loan was a bit more complex to manage than usual instruments. So we have to go as far as possible in terms of. So the fact that the MDBs are doing it is very interesting. We at AFD we proposed, but I have a discussion with my minister about it because our proposal was ambitious and we wanted to treat the stock of our exposure, and yes, it has a cost for the institution. So we're more into new flows than the stock. But if we want to make it really systemic and bring the resilience to our clients very rapidly, we have to move as international institution, as one man in this direction. And my last point, of course, is there are other circles. And so since you are at Finance in Common, whose main idea, very simple idea, is to connect international and national, I think we have to reach national development banks about it. And we are not there yet. When we called for innovations in the FIX lab, we had many answers, but not really about CRDCs. So the question is, how could we accompany national development banks to do it? I think it's very important. BNDES and the system of public development banks in Brazil, if I'm right, Ilan represents about 96% of the financing of local authorities in Brazil. So maybe Banque des Territoires in France could also provide CRDCs. Well, I'm just inviting all of you, because we're not there yet, to extend the discussion so that we are the most systemic, and then we can go also up to private sector. Maybe I stop here. And if we have the preferred creditor status attached to, maybe that's a good incentive.
Thank you so much, Remy. And I think I really heard that call for being more systemic. And I think also the experience that you shared showed really that there is a need for further simplification, which was a little bit also the point made by Rachel. And perhaps we can also start to make more momentum by adding some wording in the outcome document of the FIX. But I really would like to thank this incredible panel of speakers. I think I leave with three main takeaways from this discussion. The first one is that definitely this debt pause clauses are one of the solutions. So it's one of the tools within a much broader set of tools that we need to develop to respond to the debt stress that many developing countries are under. And I think, we have mentioned some other instruments like debt financial swaps, but I think that also remains very critical elements around the cost of capital, because it's not just an issue about the quantity of debt, but also very costly debt for countries. And the 4P is also working on this, looking at prudential regulations, looking at export credits and credit ratings, etc. The second takeaway is that there's a lot happening, and there are some clear venues, I think, from our discussions in terms of how we can collectively contribute to simplify and to enhance and to scale up, therefore, debt pause clauses. And there is efforts to be made in terms of advocacy, because we want to bring on board more creditors. We want to bring on board the private creditors also. But there's also some work in terms of really looking at how we can have this debt pause clauses work better. So looking at some of the technical aspects also that need to be improved, how to lower the cost, etc. So I think to conclude, and that's my third point, I really look forward. I really thank you for your engagement, for your leadership. We need the leadership of each one of you and so many more people who are part of this group and are with us virtually or in other ways. And we really look forward to continuing to be working together so that we can together make a very significant contribution in Sevilla and also in Belém and for the suite. So thank you so much again, and have a great rest of the afternoon.